Protein synthesis. Synthesis means to make, so protein synthesis is making proteins. And we talked about this big picture before, but here's the big picture. DNA, that codes for you, and you've got DNA in your nucleus, and the DNA codes for, it's the genetic material, so what you look like, that stuff. So DNA makes RNA, and RNA then makes proteins, and proteins are you. So you're made out of proteins and the things that some of your proteins make. So for example, your enzymes. So time to wake up. We'll say hello to Shrek. Hi, Shrek. Okay, so why are proteins so important? When you look in the mirror, hi. Um, Cute, huh? When you look in the mirror, you are looking at proteins. So if you look at this girl, she's got proteins in her. That's what you're actually looking at. So along with the proteins, there are the things, the other things that make up organisms. So you remember the four basic molecules that make everybody up: carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So when I look at you, I'm looking at your proteins and your carbs, your carbohydrates, and your lipids. But your carbs and your lipids are put together by enzymes, and the enzymes are proteins. So when I look at you, I'm looking at your proteins and the things your proteins made. So the big picture. The instructions for making you are written in your DNA code. But when I look at you, I'm not looking at your DNA. I'm looking at what your DNA has made, what it's coded for. So the proteins and the protein products. The proteins, some of which are enzymes, which put together all your carbs and lipids. That's what I'm looking at when I see you. And so there's an enzyme involved, of course. And so the enzyme is RNA polymerase. So it ends in ase, so you can tell it's an enzyme. You remember that a polymer is when you have a bunch of monomers put together. So in this case, here's your polymer. Here's a nucleotide and another nucleotide and another nucleotide and another nucleotide and another nucleotide. You put all those nucleotides together and you get the RNA polymer. So RNA, in this case it's called messenger RNA. So RNA polymerase is an enzyme, which means it's a protein, but it makes the RNA polymer, makes this thing. So the way it does that is it unwinds DNA. So this is your DNA. This big enzyme has unwound it, and so you have this strand of DNA and this strand of DNA. This strand is used as a template for coding for the RNA. So for example, if this is adenine, then that would be thymine. If this is thymine, that would be adenine. So they get matched up. And so the DNA codes, the DNA is in the nucleus and it codes for RNA. There are three types of RNA. Right now we're going to talk about messenger RNA or mRNA. That's messenger. Messenger RNA is the one that actually has the code for proteins. So we'll talk about the other kinds in a little bit. So big picture, DNA makes RNA, and that happens in the nucleus. Then the RNA leaves the nucleus, goes through that nuclear pore. So the RNA leaves the nucleus and goes out to everything outside the nucleus, which is called the cytoplasm. And that's all this. It's the goop and all the organelles. And then it finds one particular organelle, and here it is. It's called a ribosome. So the mRNA goes to a ribosome and makes a protein. So here's the RNA, and it's a special kind of RNA called messenger RNA, so we put an M in front of it. These are amino acids. And remember, amino acids are monomers, and those monomers, when they're put all together, make the polymer. Poor writing today. That's supposed to say polymer, P-O-L-Y. Anyway, this polymer is the protein variety, so we call it a polypeptide. So if that folds in the right way, you get a protein. And some of the proteins are enzymes, which put all the other molecules together, which make you. Some proteins are actually structural. So collagen, for example, is the stuff that gives your skin strength, gives your bones strength too. Keratin's in your hair and your fingernails and your skin. Gives it the waterproof qualities in your skin. Some are hormones. So for example, the protein insulin regulates your blood sugar. Some are transport proteins like hemoglobin in your blood. Some are receptors on your skin surfaces, et cetera, et cetera. So proteins fold in all kinds of special ways, so they have all kinds of special functions. So each protein type is different. So insulin is different from pepsin. Remember that enzyme that breaks down proteins? And those are both different from hemoglobin, right? So that one is a hormone, and that one carries blood. Carries oxygen through your blood. It's found in your red blood cells. So each protein is different because each protein is coded for by a different gene. In other words, a different piece of DNA. So there's a gene for insulin that'll code for insulin. There's a gene that'll code for the protein pepsin. There's another gene that will code for the protein hemoglobin. And you have all this DNA in all your cells, but the DNA for insulin is only turned on in certain cells in your pancreas. So each protein has a different amino acid sequence, and sequence is another name for order. And I'm not going to play the video because it very likely won't work in the screen capture. So messenger RNA is made where? Messenger RNA is actually made in the nucleus because remember DNA makes RNA and then the RNA makes protein. But if you remember that DNA makes RNA, the DNA is stuck in the nucleus, so the RNA is actually made in the nucleus and then the RNA leaves. Proteins are made in ribosomes, and so that's outside the nucleus. DNA is made of what monomer? DNA is made out of nucleotides. RNA is also made out of nucleotides, that's the monomer. Proteins are made out of what monomer? They are made out of amino acids. Proteins are different from each other because each has a different, should be sequence of amino acids. And I think there's another question coming up which we'll talk about this, but sequence of amino acids, you might have lysine first and then isoleucine and then glutamate. So it's the order of amino acids that makes each protein different from another. And remember those amino acids, leucine and isoleucine and valine, all those. How is one amino acid different from another? So amino acids are different from each other because each has a different, and the answer there is R group. So if you remember nitrogen, carbon, carbon with an O, that's an amino acid. This has hydrogens on it. Excuse me. Anyway, there's a hydrogen here. This is the R group. Sometimes it's just an S with an H on it. Sometimes it's just an H. Sometimes it's a ring of carbons. Sometimes it's just a carbon with some H's. But this is the part that's different from one amino acid to another, whereas all the amino acids have this stuff in common. Genes are different from each other because each has a different nucleotide bases. So for example, the gene for hemoglobin might read GCCGA, GTT, blah, 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 whatever, whereas the gene for keratin would be different. Each gene codes for a different protein. All right, protein structure. So I think this is a good time to pause.